Hello, it's good to be with you today to share these untold stories that was part of a series from Carlisle Cathedral. My name is Rob Saner-Haigh, Bishop of Penrith, and today I'm going to be reflecting on the life of St Aidan and what we can learn for our own life as disciples today. Aidan's life has been an inspiration to me since, as a relatively new Christian, I read a book by Michael Mitten called Restoring the Woven Cord. There's something about the Celtic Church that draws me deeply, which I think has much to teach us today. We, of course, in Cumbria live in the land of the Northern Saints, where small groups of missionaries brought the light of Christ to a world who knew little of Jesus Christ. Cumbria is the land of Kentigern or Mungo, and we claim Patrick as one of our own. I should say from the outset that there is a lot of romanticizing about the Celtic Church, and some of what passes today for Celtic Christianity could be said to be a bit imaginative and perhaps overly romantic. The Celtic Church, at its best, managed to do what I long to do, that is, to weave together different strands of faith, so that what we are left with is a strong cord, a cord which is made up of different strands: Bible, worship and sacrament, social justice, simplicity of living, gifts of the Spirit, and evangelism. Through the ages, different parts of the church have reclaimed each of these areas. The Reformation called us back to the Bible. The Anglo-Catholic movement reminded us of the sacraments and the beauty of worship. The liberal church has reminded us of the call to work for the poor and to challenge injustice. And the Pentecostal and charismatic movements have reminded us of the gifts of the Spirit and of spiritual warfare. The danger for all of us, from whichever background we come, is to hold perhaps too tightly to one of those strands, to find our identity through the exclusion of others. We've got to hold them together so that the strands are woven. We give of our own and we learn from others. There is in this humility, authenticity, and holiness. So we go back now to the time of Oswald, a Christian king who conquered the kingdom of Northumbria, which his father had lost in 634. And one of the first things that Oswald did was to ask the monastery on Iona to send him a missionary. They sent a man called Corman, and Corman was apparently a man of austere disposition, and he didn't go down too well with the English, and he was duly sent back to Iona, claiming that the English are an ungovernable people of an obstinate and barbarous temperament. There's a ringing endorsement for us. There was a conference wondering what on earth to do next, and a young Irish monk called Aidan stood up and said, "Brother, it seems to me that you were too severe on your hearers. You should have followed the practice of the apostles and begun by giving them the milk of simpler teaching and then gradually nourishing them with the word of God." Demonstrating once again the real dangers of speaking up in meetings, Aidan was duly consecrated bishop and dispatched to Northumbria. He set up a mission base on Lindisfarne, where he trained and taught people to teach others and to evangelize. He encouraged women in the religious life and was a friend and spiritual director to the Abbess Hilda at Whitby. People went out from Lindisfarne to found other bases, and so the good news of Jesus Christ spread through Oswald's kingdom. But Aidan is remarkable mostly for the sort of person he was. He modelled a faith which deeply impressed people and which drew them to Christ. Bede speaks of him like this. Among other evidences of holy life, he gave his clergy an inspiring example of self-discipline and continence, and the highest recommendation of his teaching to all was that he and his followers lived as they taught. He never sought or cared for any worldly possessions, and loved to give away to the poor who chanced to meet him whatever he received from kings or wealthy folk. Whether in town or country, He always travelled on foot, unless compelled by necessity to ride. Whatever people he met on his walks, whether high or low, he stopped and spoke to them. If they were heathen, he urged them to be baptized. And if they were Christians, he strengthened their faith and inspired them by word and deed to live a good life and to be generous to others. Bede further describes him as a teacher with a passionate love of goodness, tempered with humility, warmth, and gentleness. Aidan's attitude and practice was in marked contrast to some of what was happening elsewhere in the church at that time. The church was busy getting itself bound up with power and taking on some of the practices and attitudes of the world around it. So there seems to have been a development of two forms of Christian expression. And while some might question how fair this assessment is, the historian and broadcaster Magnus Magnusson described it like this. Celtic monks lived in conspicuous poverty. Other monks lived well. Celtic monks were unworldly. Roman monks were worldly. Celtic bishops practiced humility. Roman bishops paraded pomp. Celtic bishops were ministers of their flocks. Roman bishops were monarchs of their dioceses. Celtic clergymen said, "Do as I do," and hoped to be followed. Roman clergymen said, "Do as I say," and expected to be obeyed. A contemporary of Aidan, Wilfrid, took the Roman way. Standing in the grand cathedral at Ripon, which he had built, he listed all the lands which the kings had given him for their soul's salvation. His focus on power and ownership was not in the spirit of Aidan. The Celtic approach, then, was gentle and humble, and therefore altogether more sensitive to the people it was directed towards. Aidan's life was the key to his mission, because the way he lived gave him an infectious holiness, which enabled him to really engage with people, rather than simply being very strange. He could understand the world people actually lived in. How much is this the key to our own day? People believed in Jesus because they could see his teaching and his hope lived out in the life of Aidan. He was a person whose lifestyle was attractive to all who were seeking God. Aidan was no doubt influenced by Bridget, the abbess of Kildare, who said that the three things most pleasing to God were true faith in the Lord with a pure heart, a simple life with piety, and generosity with charity. This simple life meant that Aidan could communicate with those who were poor. And Bede says again of Aidan, if wealthy people did wrong, he never kept silent out of respect or fear, but corrected them outspokenly. Nor would he offer money to influential people, although he offered them food whenever he entertained them as host. But if the wealthy ever gave him gifts of money, he either distributed it for the needs of the poor, or else he used it to ransom any who had unjustly been sold as slaves. Many of those whom he had ransomed in this way later became disciples, and when they had been instructed and trained, he ordained them to the priesthood. The English church under Aidan genuinely lived close to the people. The king gave Aidan a horse because he worried about him travelling so far on foot to share the gospel. And on one journey, Aidan met a beggar and gave him the horse. The king invited Aidan to dinner and upbraided him for giving away the horse. If I knew that you'd give it away like this, I would never have given it to you. Aidan replied, what are you saying, Your Majesty? Is this child of a mare more valuable to you than this child of God? Aidan went off to dine, but the king struggled, and in the end he took off his sword, knelt before Aidan, and asked forgiveness. Michael Mitten says, the Celtic commitment to a life of holiness, expressed in poverty and simplicity, profoundly challenges the consumerist mentality of our day. It also challenges the church's use of power and wealth at every level. There are two ways of expressing faith. One which develops a close association with many of the values and structures of the powerful, and another which takes Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount seriously and dares to actually live it. And Aidan exemplifies the latter route. In J.B. Priestley's Midsummer Day's Dream, three visitors find themselves at a large house in the south of England. A nuclear holocaust has taken place, and the family in this house are some of the few survivors. They have been set free from the conspiracy of materialism, political dogmatism, and scientific rationalism which has led to the Holocaust. The three visitors, each representing one of these strands, are outraged by the family's rejection of what they stand for, by their life of simplicity, love for the earth, and enjoyment of spiritual values. The family don't try and manipulate or persuade their guests. They're simply themselves, and their visitors are slowly beguiled by the magic of the place. They are like those awoken from sleep. Something in them comes back to life. The small community, vulnerable as it is powerful in making its mark on the powerful forces around it. We can learn from Aidan's combination of gentleness and toughness. A gentleness to understand the vulnerable and the poor. A toughness to challenge the church when it is seduced by all kinds of power. As a church, as followers of Christ, we are called to this gentleness and toughness, to swim against the tide and be a community of authenticity, simplicity, and holiness. This is not so that the church can be put right or once again try and reach that imaginary time of power and success, but rather so that we can live again joyfully and confidently a beatitude lifestyle in our confused world, in which we can live lives which truthfully tell of another world, which in its simplicity is full of abundant life. I want to finish with a prayer, actually not of Aidan, but of another Celtic saint, Brendan, known as Brendan the Navigator. His prayer speaks to me of this amazing call of Christ to follow him wherever he leads, and whatever the circumstances, to be surprised by what might happen, and to loosen control of where I might be taken. A life, I think, a bit more like Aidan's. Lord, help me to journey beyond the familiar and into the unknown. Give me the faith to leave old ways and break fresh ground with you. Christ of the mysteries, I trust you to be stronger than each storm within me. I will trust in the darkness, and know that my times, even now, are in your hand. Tune my spirit to the music of heaven, and somehow make my obedience count for you. Amen. Thank you.